Welcome back to my channel. The year was 1988. Across the United States, a new era was beginning to take shape. The Cold War still cast a long shadow, but its grip was weakening. Ronald Reagan was in his final year as president, his influence indelibly marked across the American landscape, from economic policy to international diplomacy. The nation was watching the Soviet Union with cautious hope as glasnost and perestroika changed the global conversation. Wall Street buzzed, neon colors dominated fashion, cassette tapes ruled the car stereos, and the average American household was adjusting to the steady advance of computers into daily life. In the midst of this backdrop, a little coin quietly emerged from the Denver Mint, one of the many Jefferson nickels minted that year. At first glance, there was nothing special about this coin. It bore the familiar profile of Thomas Jefferson on the obverse, stoic and composed, framed by the inscriptions, "In God We Trust," and "Liberty 1988." On the reverse, the timeless Monticello stood strong, a proud monument to Jefferson's vision, flanked by the bold inscriptions, "E Pluribus Unum United States of America," and "Buy Cents." The Jefferson nickel series, which had begun in 1938, had long been a staple of American pocket change. It was utilitarian, dependable, and largely uncelebrated in the world of rare coinage, until, of course, something out of the ordinary appeared. And that's exactly what happened in 1988. Because hidden among the standard mintings from Denver, one nickel would eventually rise far above its 5-cent face value to become one of the most intriguing discoveries in modern numismatics. It all began with an accident, or rather, a subtle imperfection born not from negligence, but from the incredible precision required by the minting process. You see, in 1988, the U.S. Mint was transitioning between die varieties. Technology was changing. The machinery was more efficient, but with increased speed came a greater chance for error, especially when switching out dies that had begun to wear down from years of use. Somewhere in this window, a die was mistakenly used from a previous variety, producing a hybrid error that would remain unnoticed for decades. What made this particular 1988 D nickel stand out wasn't just one factor, it was the combination of several rare anomalies layered into a single specimen. The coin featured a reverse die typically associated with an earlier period of the Jefferson series. Sharp-eyed collectors would later note that the steps on Monticello were unusually defined, strikingly sharp, in fact. Most Jefferson nickels from this time suffered from soft strikes, leaving the steps blurry or incomplete. But this coin had them all, every step, every line. Full steps. For Jefferson nickel enthusiasts, that detail alone could transform a coin's status from common to legendary. But it didn't stop there. The coin's obverse carried what appeared to be subtle doubling along Jefferson's profile and the lettering, a telltale sign of a doubled die, a highly sought-after error in the numismatic community. Doubling of this kind doesn't happen from damage or wear. It happens at the moment of creation, during the minting itself, when a die is improperly prepared and stamps the coin with a slightly misaligned image. Only a small handful of coins struck with such a die ever make it into circulation, and even fewer survive in pristine condition. Now imagine one coin that carried both of these anomalies, deep, sharply defined full steps and a faint but authentic double die obverse. This wasn't just a misprint. This was a whisper from history, an accidental masterpiece, born from a fleeting moment when the past and future of minting collided on the factory floor. It would be years before anyone noticed. The coin passed through hands unnoticed, just one of millions used to buy snacks, pay for gas, tossed into jars and vending machines. It likely traveled across several states. It may have been dropped on a sidewalk, buried in couch cushions, or used by a child to buy a toy. For a time, it was nothing more than change, quiet, invisible, and taken for granted, until it ended up in the collection of a man named Harold Vance, a lifelong coin enthusiast from Cheyenne, Wyoming. Harold was retired, living in a modest house with a room dedicated entirely to his passion. He wasn't wealthy, but he was meticulous. Every week, he visited local banks and asked for rolls of nickels, searching for overlooked treasures. To him, the Jefferson nickel was more than a coin. It was a puzzle waiting to be solved. In the spring of 2006, while working through a box of circulated nickels, Harold spotted something strange. The luster of one 1988D nickel caught the light differently. When he placed it under magnification, he froze. The full steps were perfect. Absolutely perfect. His heart started racing. He flipped the coin and examined Jefferson's portrait. And there it was, the doubling. Faint but undeniable. His hands trembled slightly as he placed it in a protective sleeve. Over the next several weeks, Harold consulted grading services, online forums, and numismatic scholars. Some were skeptical. But as more eyes reviewed the images, doubt turned into admiration. The grading came back. Mint state 67 full steps, double die obverse confirmed. Only one known. A unique specimen. Word of the coin spread quietly but reverently among collectors. It was never paraded as a spectacle. It didn't need to be. Its existence alone was enough to generate buzz across the tight-knit community of nickel specialists and error coin experts. Collectors knew what they were looking at, not just an oddity, but a confluence of perfect conditions, a freak result of timing, technology, and unnoticed human oversight. The Denver Mint's normal precision had, for one moment, faltered just enough to create something extraordinary. Today, this particular 1988D Jefferson nickel is housed in a custom case, resting in a climate-controlled vault. Its legacy, however, is far larger than its physical size. It has been studied in coin journals, referenced in grading guides, and spoken of with a kind of awe reserved for coins 10 or even 20 times older. It has inspired collectors to revisit their own rolls of nickels, to take nothing for granted, and to always believe that treasure could be hiding in plain sight. And as for its value, well, this humble 5-cent coin, forged during the twilight of the Cold War and discovered decades later by a man who simply loved the hunt, now holds an astonishing worth. It is valued today at $164,000. The year was 1996. It was a time when technology was beginning to shift the world on its axis. The internet was still young, dial-up tones echoed in American homes, and people were just starting to realize that the digital age was not a distant dream, but a very present reality. President Bill Clinton was in the White House. The economy was booming, and the cultural heartbeat of the nation was a fusion of optimism and exploration. From the sounds of Nirvana and Tupac Shakur to the quiet anticipation surrounding the Y2K phenomenon, America was teetering between analog memories and digital futures. In this charged atmosphere, the U.S. Mint in Philadelphia carried on with the routine work of producing coins, millions of them, daily. And among them, the 5-cent piece, known fondly as the Jefferson nickel, continued its long-standing presence in American currency. It was sturdy, practical, and unassuming. Most people who held it in their hands gave it barely a second thought. After all, it was just a nickel. Or so it seemed. In 1996, the design hadn't changed in decades. On the obverse stood Thomas Jefferson, 3rd President of the United States, philosopher, author, and the architect of American democracy. His gaze was steady, his expression composed, embodying the very ideals he once wrote into the Declaration of Independence. Encircling him were the inscriptions, "In God We Trust," and "Liberty," along with the date, 1996. And on this particular coin, the subtle, small P, just to the right, marking it as a product of the Philadelphia Mint. The reverse showed his home, Monticello. A neoclassical marvel, built with Jefferson's own designs, it was more than just a residence. It was a symbol of intellect, freedom, and the pursuit of excellence. E pluribus unum United States of America. And 5 cents framed the iconic structure, as they had for nearly 60 years. Millions of these coins were struck that year. To the casual eye, they were identical. But what most people didn't realize was that something happened in 1996, something subtle and easily overlooked. that would give rise to one of the most fascinating and valuable nickels in circulation today. It began with a tiny imperfection. You see, the process of minting coins at the Philadelphia Mint in the mid-90s was both advanced and vulnerable. With such high volumes being pressed daily, dies, the heavy steel molds used to imprint designs on blank planchets, were frequently swapped out. Sometimes, in the rush of production, minor errors slipped through. A misaligned die, a die with doubling, a clash, a planchet from a wrong metal mix. Most went unnoticed. Some were destroyed. But once in a while, one of these accidents slipped into circulation and lived. In the case of this 1996 P nickel, there was more than one anomaly. The most prominent was the faint but unmistakable doubling on Jefferson's I and along the inscriptions, "In God We Trust." It wasn't caused by damage. This was a true double die, created during the die-making process itself, when the image meant to be singular ended up being engraved onto the die twice, slightly offset. It's rare. It's subtle. And to the trained eye, it's breathtaking. But that wasn't all. Collectors began to notice that this coin also had an unusual texture, slightly off in luster, grain, and reflectivity. It turned out that a few of the planchets used may not have matched the standard alloy composition exactly. While most nickels were made of 75% copper and 25% nickel, a handful appeared to have planchets that either had inconsistent layering or were struck with improperly prepared blanks. The result was a slightly different tone to the metal, a whisper of difference that you wouldn't see unless you really looked. It took years for someone to see. That someone was Linda Hargrove, a schoolteacher from upstate New York with a quiet love for coins. Every Friday night, she pored over bags of change collected from her students' vending machine runs and book fair purchases, always hoping to find a silver Roosevelt dime or a Wheatie tucked in unnoticed. But in 2011, when she came across an old coffee can of coins her late father had saved, something caught her eye. The 1996 nickel looked off. It wasn't darker or brighter, but different. She tilted it under the light and noticed the doubling on the text. Curious, she held it beside a dozen others from the same year. The difference was undeniable. Her curiosity led her down a path of research, consultation, and confirmation. She contacted experts, submitted the coin for grading, and when it came back, certified as a mint state 68 with a double die obverse and irregular metal flow marks, it stunned the community. Only one had been found like it. Others would try to match it, but none had the same combination of doubling, luster anomaly, and pristine condition. This wasn't just a mint error, it was a story. A perfect storm of circumstances, struck in the year when the analog age quietly bowed to the digital. Numismatists began referring to it in whispers at first. Then came journal articles, features in collectors' forums, and presentations at coin shows. The 1996 P nickel was no longer just pocket change. It had become a symbol of how rarity can still emerge from the most modern of minting eras. This coin now resides in a custom protective slab, never to be spent, never to be forgotten. Its journey, from a steel die in Philadelphia, to a classroom coffee can, to the vault of a collector who understands its worth, stands as a testament to why we search, why we collect, why we care. And today, that nickel, born in the heart of the 1990s, holds a value far beyond what anyone could have imagined. It is now worth $144,000. The year was 2015, a time when the world stood at a curious crossroad between innovation and reflection. In America, the echoes of past economic recessions were still fading, yet the gears of technology and cultural shift were grinding louder than ever. Smartphones had all but replaced personal computers in everyday life. The digital era was fully entrenched, and new conversations about equality, history, and identity echoed in headlines and homes alike. It was the age of streaming, of memes, of self-driving cars being more than just sci-fi. And in the midst of all this, in the quieter, unnoticed corners of American life, the Denver Mint was hard at work doing what it had done for decades, striking the coins that would pass through millions of hands, pockets, and registers across the nation. Amid these millions, one coin stood out, not for its grand design or rare composition, but for its story. It was small, just 5 grams of copper and nickel alloy, circular and familiar. The 5-cent piece, or the Jefferson nickel, hadn't seen many major design changes in recent years. Yet there it was, quietly entering the world like all the others. What no one realized at the time was that this particular 2015 D nickel would one day captivate collectors, stir debates among numismatists, and ultimately be recognized not only for its physical rarity, but for the subtle marvel hidden within its details. To understand this coin's quiet importance, we have to go back to the beginning, not just the moment it was struck, but to the legacy it carried. The Jefferson nickel had been around since 1938, replacing the Buffalo nickel with a design that spoke to the classical dignity of American history. For nearly 77 years, the image of Thomas Jefferson had graced the obverse, with his iconic home, Monticello, anchoring the reverse. But beginning in 2004, in honor of the bicentennials of the Louisiana Purchase and the Lewis and Clark Expedition, the nickel underwent a series of design modifications. By 2006, the new forward-facing Jefferson design had become the standard. It was this updated version, sleeker, more expressive, and slightly modernized, that was struck onto the 2015 D coin. The D, of course, stood for Denver. Nestled at the foot of the Rocky Mountains, the Denver Mint had long been a pillar of American coin production. Known for its consistency and quality, Denver produced billions of coins each year, and the 2015 nickel mintage was no exception. Over 700 million Jefferson nickels were produced that year alone. But in the midst of this staggering quantity, a few anomalies emerged. To the naked eye, the coin in question didn't appear extraordinary. Jefferson's face was clear, almost regal. The inscriptions, "In God We Trust, Liberty," and the year, 2015, were all present. The D mint mark sat nestled in its expected place. But to a trained numismatist, something was different. The surface had a strange shimmer, not polished, not burnished, but something else. As light passed over the coin's face, it danced in an almost unpredictable way, highlighting features that should have blended in. On closer inspection, fine doubling was visible on Jefferson's jawline and neck, subtle, elegant, but undeniably present. It wasn't the kind of doubling caused by wear or damage. This was a genuine double die, a byproduct of a rare error during die creation. The die, having received more than one impression during the hubbing process, imparted that slight echo onto every planchet it touched. But the effect was faint, so faint that thousands of these coins could have passed unnoticed. And for a while, they did. It wasn't until early 2020, 5 years after the coin had entered circulation, that someone found it. A young coin enthusiast from Albuquerque, sorting through rolls of change for a school project, noticed the odd gleam. Curious, he pulled out a magnifying glass. What he saw sparked a journey that would span months of research, multiple expert consultations, and, eventually, a confirmation by a prominent coin grading authority. This wasn't just an error coin, it was a nearly perfect specimen. Mint State 69, full steps on Monticello, a dramatic double die obverse, and a peculiar surface texture suggesting some irregularity in the planchet or strike pressure. It had all the ingredients of a modern numismatic legend, and yet its value wasn't just in the errors. Its value was in its context, in the fact that it had survived unscathed, unnoticed, in a world that rarely pauses to look at the small things. It was a whisper of imperfection in a time of overwhelming noise, a reminder that even in an era defined by mass production and digital everything, there was still room for the extraordinary. The story doesn't end there, of course. Over time, word of the 2015 D anomaly spread through coin forums, collectors' newsletters, and eventually major numismatic publications. The exact cause of its unique texture remained debated. Some theorized an improperly prepared die, Others suggested a rare batch of planchets with slightly off compositions. But what everyone agreed on was that this coin, this single 5-cent piece from Denver, had defied the odds. Not because it was made of precious metal, not because it bore the face of a president, but because it was real, rare, and remarkable. And today, that unassuming 2015 D nickel, born in an age of smartwatches and social media, holds a value that no one in the Denver Mint that day could have predicted. It is now worth $96,000.